Yes, Mr. Pretorius, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Agrizzi.
Can I just, for completeness, just clarify something before Mr. Advocate Pretorius
Yes, do that.
begins? I just would like to clarify 27.17.
1 second. Yes.
In terms of the payment of the dividends into the trust account of the attorney.
Yes.
I just want to clarify that. So the dividends from B Defence would be paid into the trust account of the attorneys, and it would then, on instruction, be transferred into the bank account of Bosasa Operations. And that would be the flow.
As is.
As a transfer of dividends.
Yes.
So there was no need to open up an account for Bopa and Bafoga.
Yes.
Okay, just for completeness.
Are you able to say why it was necessary for the dividends to go to the attorney's trust account first before they were transferred as they were to Bosasa's account?
I'm willing to tell you, Chair, and the reason is simply because the shareholders would have normally had to receive the dividends. In this instance, the shareholders who were reflected on paper were actually not shareholders, so they did not get the dividends.
Yes.
And a simple search and a request, you would be able to verify that the dividends were never actually paid to the shareholders. They were paid to Bosasa Operations every single time.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Advocate Pretorius.
Thank you, Mr. Agrizzi. We also omitted to refer to paragraph 29.5.8. If you would go there, please, and just tell the Chair about the meeting referred to in that paragraph.
Sorry, could you repeat the paragraph number, please?
29.5.8.
Sorry, I'm just...
That's on page 60.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I
affidavit.
didn't see that.
Paragraph 29.5.8.
Chair, I, together with Andres van Tonda, on instruction from Gavin Watson, then had to attend to a meeting that was held with Rian Hoeksma. And the reason why was that we needed to make sure that he did not present a version to events if he was questioned during an investigation that might incriminate any of the parties. And that at that stage, and I believe to date, he has still not been interviewed by anybody from the SIU.
Yes.
So we attended a meeting to say to him, please cover up, in short.
And he agreed.
He agreed.
Thank you.
And the events which are referred to in that paragraph are the events related to the house of Mr. MT.
The one in Savannah Hills, that is correct.
And it might clarify matters a little. Savannah Hills is not a suburb. It's a townhouse complex, I understand.
Chair, it's a townhouse complex situated, if you're coming from Johannesburg side, if you're driving towards the Protea Hotel, it's on that road. It's on your left-hand side, Savannah Hills. If you need details of the actual house, I can provide that.
Now, that reminds me, the house that was built by Rian Hoeksma's company for Mr. MT. Do you have a recollection of what its value was, more or less?
It was on the market for about 6 million rand, if I'm not mistaken, at one stage, but that was quite a while back, about 10 years ago. So the value of the property, if I compare it, for instance, to my property, I mean, it's much more elaborate. My property is only valued at about 10 million. That property would be valued at closer to about 18 million, 16 million, between there.
As of now, or as at the time when it was built?
No, as of now,
As of now?
yes.
Okay, so it would be, your estimate is that it would be around 18 million in value?
18.
18. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
If you go to, please, to paragraph 29.9, Mr. Agrizzi.
29.9, during 2007, Mr. Vernie Peterson was appointed as the National Commissioner, and on numerous occasions I tried to communicate with him, with him about possible ventures, but he had to have nothing to do with the Bosasa group of companies.
Yeah, just before you proceed on that, let me just complete the picture with regard to what we have referred to as Mr. MT's house.
Yes.
Is your evidence that ultimately Mr. MT lost out on that house? It never got registered in his name as had been planned initially,
That is correct,
even to this day?
even to this day.
He may have enjoyed the benefit of living in it, but he paid rent which he thought would be returned to him, but ultimately was never returned. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So he lost out.
He lost out. He walked out with only the furniture.
Yes, and that was mainly because the SIU had started working, investigating why he lost out.
That is correct.
And there was fear that if it was transferred to him, it would just spell trouble.
He was given an option of either staying in the house and staying in jail, or moving out of the house so it could be covered up.
Yeah, thank you.
Who paid the rent for that house?
At one stage, we increased his payment from 65,000 Rand a month in cash to 100,000 Rand in cash. That was when he left the department, because the department originally was paying for his rent of the property which Bosasa had built.
So before he left correctional services, the department was paying his rent.
That's correct.
And after he had left the department, Bosasa paid the rent by way of increasing his monthly payment, or it just increased his monthly payment and he would then pay the rent himself?
We increased the monthly payment so that he could pay the rent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Agrizzi, you say during mid-2007, Vernie Peterson was appointed as National Commissioner. National Commissioner of which department?
Of the Department of Correctional Services.
You say you attempted to communicate with him about possible future ventures, but he would have nothing to do with any of the companies in the Bosasa group.
That is correct.
At around that time, was a further meeting held with officials of the Department of Correctional Services?
Correct.
Would you please tell the chair of that meeting?
Chair, a meeting was coordinated. I was called into the meeting. It wasn't the first meeting, it was the second meeting. And at the same meeting, it was arranged between myself, Gavin Watson. There was a gentleman by the name of Kulakani Sitole, who used to be the previous Commissioner of Correctional Services. Another person that was...
He had been... okay, maybe let me ask this.
Yes,
In terms of time or year, where are we now in regard to that meeting?
2007, Chair.
2007.
Correct.
Okay, so if you say Mr. Kulaganis Tole used to be Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, that would have been before Mr. MT or even before that?
I'm not too sure when he was,
Yeah, but
it was before.
Okay, all right, thank you. You may proceed.
There was another gentleman by the name of Zbu. I can't recall his surname. At the time, I was told he was I think the General Secretary of POPCRU.
It's a trade union.
Yes. I cannot verify that. I was told that, Chair. At that stage, I wasn't really interested in the process.
What was the subject matter of that meeting?
Well, the subject matter was to discuss how they could swing Bernie Peterson and get to a solution where he would start communicating with Bosasa.
Did you finish telling us the people who attended the meeting?
The one person was Spu, it was Kulakani Sitole. Those were the people that attended with Watson and myself.
Okay, thank you.
I cannot recall if there were any other Bosasa directors at the meeting.
You say that the subject matter of the meeting was an attempt to find a solution to Mr. Peterson's refusal to communicate with Bosasa.
Correct.
What happened?
Well, it was agreed that they, which included Mr. Ngele, who was the regional commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, would be paid R1 million per month.
Regional Commissioner of Department of Correctional Services in Gauteng?
No, in KZN.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
When you say it was agreed that they, including Mr. Ngele, would be paid R1 million per month, what is the detail? Was that for all, some? Who are the they?
That was for the team. How they were going to distribute it, I haven't got a clue. I wasn't involved in that. It was an invoice that they would provide us.
Who would provide you?
Well, it would normally come from, Sitole would get somebody to email it to us, and I would then receive it and pass it on to accounts, get Gavin Watson to approve it and put it through for payment.
Who would produce the invoices?
I cannot recall. I don't have my laptop anymore. That is in possession of African Global. But the invoices would be sent to me, and I would then process the invoices. And it was on a company letter invoice, which was called Flash Central.
So, is what you are saying this, that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss what was to be done about Mr. Peterson's refusal to have anything to do with Bosasa. Is that right?
The group of companies, you are correct.
Yeah. And you say it was agreed at that meeting that is it 2 or 3 correctional services people, Kulegan Sitole, Mngele, it was those 2?
It was those 2 that were there from previous correctional services.
Yeah, that they would be paid an amount of R1 million, which they would distribute among themselves, or it would be paid in certain amounts and you don't know what amounts, but the amount for them was R1 million. Was that R1 million per month?
R1 million a month?
Yes.
And at that stage, Chair, and I think I'll go into it later on, there was even a dispute in terms of the VAT payment.
Yes. I think Mr. Pretorius is still going to come to it. Let me allow him to do that.
Perhaps I will. Thanks, Chair. You say that invoices were produced, fictitious invoices, on behalf of the team for R1 million per month, and these would be paid by Bosasa.
That is correct.
Okay, maybe I'll ask this because I want to know it now.
Sure.
But in terms of the agreement reached at that meeting, what were the two people going to do in order to, what were they going to do for Bosasa? Because the national commissioner was Mr. Peterson and he wanted to have nothing to do with Bosasa. What were they going to do? He was the top man, isn't it?
That is correct. Chair, and once more, it is my thinking, from what I heard in the meeting, was that they would put undue pressure on the department and on Bernie Peterson through the associations with Pop Crew and with the unions and the people.
Also, what was sought was that they would do whatever was necessary to put pressure on Mr. Peterson, I guess, to make sure that the attitude towards Bosasa changed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and you refer in the last sentence of 29.10 to that very quid pro quo. What
Correct.
was the intention of the payment?
Correct.
What was the intention?
Well, the
of
intention
payment?
was to utilize that to get influence against Bernie Peterson and to get him to either agree to work with us or to fool the wrath of Pop Crew.
And what was the purpose of obtaining Mr. Peterson's cooperation?
At that stage, he was the decision maker. He was accounting officer for correctional services.
But it may be obvious in the light of your earlier evidence, but let's be express here. What was the purpose of obtaining his cooperation?
Well, because obviously we wanted more business and new opportunities. I mean, all the opportunities have now dried up. All the effort and the money that had been spent before had all disappeared.
Were these payments made?
Yes, they were.
On a monthly basis, you say?
That's correct.
And for how long did they continue?
I cannot recall exactly how long or what period they were at, but what I do recall is that at one stage there was an issue with regards to the VAT, which I said was their baby and their responsibility, and at one stage we lost the staffing of the control rooms at correctional services, and so we reduced the amount from 1 million to 700,000.
I understand your evidence to be that the recipients of the payments were unhappy that the 1 million rand included VAT.
Yes.
Right.
The money that the two got, Mr. Kulegane Sitole and Mr. Emngele, do you know what Mr. Emngele's full name is or was?
Chair, I cannot pronounce it, but it is, I can provide you with it later. It is in the record somewhere.
Oh, okay. So this 1 million was for the two of them, as far as you understood, or were they to share it with other people?
We were told that they were the leaders of the pack, and they would share it with the other hungry, what do you call them, people?
Does that mean that it was hoped that part of it would, that they would try and use it to try and get Mr. Peterson to change his attitude, or it was clear that Mr. Peterson wasn't that type of person?
Mr. Peterson was not that type of person. I don't know how they would have tried to do it.
Yes. So,
and I didn't ask.
Yes. But what you are saying is they would use it for themselves, but they would or could use it to help to get other decision makers within correctional services, or to get other people who could put pressure to put pressure.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
Was that amount of 1 million rand amended at any stage?
It was, Chair, it was dropped down to 700,000 rand per month, and purely because there was one contract that Sondolo lost, so it was taken out to 700,000 rand. And then eventually, I think we realized, and I went to Mr. Watson and I said, look, we're wasting our time with these guys, just stop it, we're wasting money.
And the contract that you lost, specify that, please?
That was the staffing of the control rooms, if I'm not mistaken.
At correctional services facilities.
Correct.
You've spoken about that contract earlier, have you?
That is correct.
So you say that you ultimately said to Mr. Watson, you were wasting money on these people. Is it the two that you have talked about in the previous paragraph that you are talking about?
Correct.
Is your evidence that they were not delivering?
At the end of the day, it was just they weren't delivering anything to us.
Yes.
We were just paying money out to them every month on an invoice.
Yes. And did Mr. Watson agree that you?
No.
He didn't agree.
No.
So you continued paying them.
It continued for a month, and then it was cancelled, and he agreed to cancel it, and he offered them an optional alternative.
Right, well, what happened during 2008 in this regard?
Well, it ceased, and
What
with
ceased?
the payment of the 700,000 rand. And what happened was it continued, but because Ngele was the commissioner of KZN, and he made life very difficult if you didn't pay on time.
Right, just let's stop there because it may be confusing. It couldn't cease and continue. Just be a bit more particular.
Just repeat your question, please.
So what happened to the arrangement in 2008?
It ceased.
Completely?
It ceased with Sithole and Zbu.
And in relation to Mr. Ngele?
Well, they continued, but on a different basis. Perhaps
Would you
that's
tell
right.
the chair about that, please?
Yes. So let's say that agreement stopped. But we realized that, and there was enough pressure, and at that stage I'd never even met Ngele. I'm just giving you it as it was. He put a lot of pressure. He would phone up Gavin Watson all hours of the day. I remember one day, strangely enough, that he sent a message to Gavin Watson and to all the other directors to say, Abakati. I don't know what that means, but I got it as well. Angelo, he mentioned my name, Abakati, something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
To today, I don't know what the word means.
Okay. Well, do you know how it was spelled?
Abakati. I probably got the message here.
Oh, okay.
I will find it.
Okay.
Sorry, these things are coming back to me now, Chair.
Yes.
But,
okay.
but what happened was it was agreed that an amount of 57,500 would be given to Nelo on a monthly basis for his influence.
To Ngele.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
For in the KZN region of the Department of Correctional Services.
Was Mr. Ngele happy with that amount?
No, he was extremely unhappy about it.
And what did he want?
Well, it was about the same time, and I accompanied Mr. Johannes Gumedi to a meeting with Nele. So whenever they didn't want to pay somebody, they would always take me with. And I would have to explain about the auditors that are all over us, and we cannot do it anymore, and that type of thing. So I went to the meeting, and the meeting was held at the Intercontinental Hotel at OR Tambo, in the Quills, I think it's called, restaurant. Down at the bottom, on the furthest left-hand side. And the meeting started very cordial. As a matter of fact, Mr. Nele was in his full regalia, full uniform, and I commented.
Correctional Services uniform.
Correct, yes. And I commented on how smart he looked, and he was getting on a plane back to KZN. So he had limited time to meet with us. Or he was on his way to Johannesburg. I can't remember if he was leaving or coming, but he was at the restaurant with us in uniform. This was my very first meeting with him. I'd never met him before. Now, prior to that meeting, Mr. Gumedi and myself were in the vault when Gavin Watson was briefing us on what to say to him. and also packing the money for him in one of the security envelopes. So I specifically looked at the amount and I asked what the amount was, and I checked that it was packed in properly. And it was 57,500. And the bag was sealed.
57,500 rand.
That is correct. The bag was sealed and the bag was placed, Mr. Gumedi took the bag. And then during lunch, we actually sat with him. And he was very cordial.
At the hotel now?
At the hotel. So I'm just telling you about the packing of it because it's got relevance. And he said that he was unhappy with the amount that was paid to him. And I explained to him that Bosasa at that stage was not in a position to increase the agreed upon amount, and the security bag was handed over across the table actually it was handed to him by Mr. Gumedi. And then during lunch, everything was fine. But after lunch, during lunch, everything was fine. When it got to the end of lunch, he said he was unhappy and he would convey this dissatisfaction to Gavin Watson. All right? He said that the money that was in the bag was not the money that was promised to him. So I thought, and I confronted Joe Gumedi, that maybe he had taken out some money. It wasn't the case. He didn't take out anything. Joe wouldn't lie to me about something like that. And we found out that it was actually the amount, and he was just unhappy with it. So he phoned Joe and he left messages for Joe Gumedi.
Before you go on, who was present at that lunch?
Myself, Johannes Gumedi were present at that lunch.
And Mr. Nkele?
Yes.
And those were the people who were at the meeting as well?
Correct.
So it was 3 people?
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, do I understand that the meeting and the lunch were the same occasion? Or am I incorrect?
No, you're 100% right. That's the meeting at the Coles lunch, and then there's a second one that was held because...
Are you still to come to that?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Well, let's get there.
Okay.
You deal with it in paragraph 2915.
That's right. So Nele was still not happy and satisfied, and he conveyed this dissatisfaction to Gavin Watson. Numerous messages. As a matter of fact, it got so bad that eventually he would be passed from one handler to the next. So first Ishmael would handle him, then Joe would try and handle him, then Joe would give up, and then Trevor had to handle him. So Trevor Matenjwa was now given the responsibility of handling Mr. Nele.
So this is now in the months after that meeting?
It's 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later,
Okay,
Chair.
all right.
Okay. So, Chair, what happened was I was then told to once more accompany Trevor Matenjwa, who was at that stage the director of Sondolo, managing director, to the Beverly Hills Hotel in Umhlanga. So,
In Durban?
Sorry?
In Durban?
Oh, okay, Durban. Right next to the oyster box.
Okay.
Okay. And so we went through to the I went through to the Beverly Hills Hotel because I had my own vehicle down there. And we had a meeting with Mr. Nele. And it was a long meeting. It was about 2 hours. And at the meeting, I explained to him that Bosasa was not in a position to increase the amounts. They were not in a position to give him any more. And he wasn't happy with it all. He wasn't happy. He said he would deal with it in his own way. And he left with the explanation. He wasn't happy. He said, I'm leaving. I'm not happy with the explanation. Got up and stormed out. And he left without taking the grey security bag. He left that with Mr. Matenjwa. So I was...
Oh, so you went to this meeting at Beverly Hills with a security bag containing money for him?
57,500 rand.
Yes. Yeah.
This is the second one.
Yes.
So what happened was comical because we sat in the Beverly Hills lounge. We offered to give him the bag. He said, I'm not taking it. And he stormed out. And about 10 minutes later, he then phoned Mr. Matenjwa up and he said, "Where's my bag? Can I come back and fetch my bag?" So it was a bit comical at this stage. And he then told Trevor to make arrangements for the collection thereof.
Trevor being Mr. Matenjwa.
Correct.
Okay.
So he got his bag at the end of the day. I was with Trevor when he phoned him to ask where Trevor was, so that Trevor could still give him back the bag. All right.
So on that occasion, you were present when the bag was handed over to him?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Mr. Pretorius, I don't know, sometimes when you read the transcript later, because the transcriber or the one typing the record doesn't know how a certain name is spelled. They can write things that don't relate to you, to what exactly happened. Maybe we should spell some of the names that may be difficult for purposes of the transcriber. What do you think?
No, I've done so, but perhaps I should do more.
Yeah, I'm thinking particularly of Ngele because it is Ngele, but the witness pronounces it not as Ngele, and somebody who is typing the same name might write Nene or something else, so it might help. Yes. Ngele is Nxele. Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
That is correct.
There are other ways to do it. We could provide the transcriber with the statement.
I'm quite happy as long as it is done. Even if we don't do it here, just to make sure that when they type, they have the right spelling, so that can be done. If there's another way of doing it without us spelling the names here, I'm quite happy.
I think of France, for example, how that would be spelt by the transcriber, and we've got lots of experience of that. You refer in paragraph 29.16 to two purchases, and you say this occurred at some stage. Can you recall when? More or less.
I think the timing of this was probably in the region of about 2006, 2007, I think. Chair, I stand to correction. I stand to correction. Are they in terms of 29.16?
Yeah, well, perhaps there's another way of dealing with it. At that time, what position did Mr. Gillingham hold?
Mr. Gillingham was the Chief Financial Officer.
Department of Correctional Services.
That is correct.
Yes. What happened?
Gavin Watson instructed Franz Foster that he needed to buy a new E-Class Mercedes for Gillingham from Constantia Cliff Motors. And Andries van Tonder had to purchase a new Polo VW from the Glen for Megan Gillingham, his daughter.
The Polo was purchased, according to your evidence, from who?
From Volkswagen the Glen, right, which is in Alberton.
And how were these payments to be made?
Look, the payments had to be made from electronic transfers from personal accounts, because you can't very well go with a bag of cash and say, I want to buy a Mercedes E320, or I want to buy a new Polo. People are not going to accept it, and it's going to raise a lot of concerns. And you can't just deposit it into their account. So the only way to do it is to actually do an EFT and to pay for it like that, or to do it like every other normal person and take it over on the HP contract. So it was done via EFT from personal accounts.
Whose personal accounts?
I've got to remember now. Sorry, Chair, this is quite some time ago.
Are you referring to
29 point, excuse me?
29.17. If you can't remember from whose personal accounts these payments were made.
Well, I know that it was through Franz Foster's personal account and Andries van Tonder's personal account.
And would there be any refund to the person who'd financed
Yes.
the purchase?
Yes.
How would that be effected?
Well, how it would be done is a bonus would be put through for the person, and the payment would then be made, the tax paid on it, and the check or the EFT would be deposited into the person's account that had to make the payment.
Right. And which company effected the refund?
Well, the refund would have been done via Concilium Business Consultants.
And did an issue arise in relation to this arrangement? You deal with that in paragraph 2918.
Well, there was an issue because the Mercedes-Benz had to be paid immediately. They needed the payment. And when you order a car from Mercedes-Benz, you basically have to take delivery of the car. You can't turn around and say, well, I'd prefer Mr. X to take over the car. The car was ordered by France, and the only way to get it into Gillingham's name would be to do it through a company or to do it, to actually order it in his name. So what happened was I received a bonus of 150,000 Rand, which I then paid over to Carlos Bonifacio, who was the Bosasa employee, as a loan. And then I would be reimbursed via Concilium Consultants. I received the bonus, I paid my money to Carlos, and Carlos in turn paid Constantia Kloof Motors.
What happened to Mr. Gillingham during September 2008?
He was suspended together with Zach Medise.
Did Mr. Gillingham contest his suspension?
Yes, he did.
Was he assisted in any respect by Bosasa?
Yes, we paid his attorney's fees.
And what happened during 2008 in relation to the SIU investigation and Mr. Gillingham?
Well, the SIU raided his house, Mr. Gillingham's house. Gavin Watson phoned me and said that the SIU had raided the house, come across a Bosasa laptop in the possession of Gillingham with the specification documents on it. He instructed me to go and meet with Gillingham, and I left the office and was on my way to Gillingham and to meet him at his house.
Did you meet Gillingham?
Yes. When I arrived at his house, he mentioned that the SIU had also found a business card printed for him by Dr. Jürgen Smith, which showed that he was a consultant for Concilium Business Consultants. I must just add, I knew nothing about that. He then informed me he was instructed by Gavin Watson to accompany Dr. Jürgen Smith to a meeting with the manufacturer of items for the Department of Correctional Services, and that they had to believe that he was a director of Concilium Business Consultants. So,
at the time, do you know whether, well, you know that Mr. Gillingham was still employed, albeit on suspension, by the Department of Correctional Services. Did you know whether he was also a consultant for Concilium?
He was not actually a consultant for Concilium because I checked afterwards and he never appeared on Concilium's payroll.
Do you know whether he was a director of Concilium Business Consultants at that time?
He was not a director. At the meeting, he was to lead them to believe that he was a director of Concilium Business Consultants.
There will be evidence later about the SIU search on the premises of Mr. Gillingham, but in the meanwhile, did you receive any instructions from Gavin Watson relating to the ramifications that the raid might have had for those concerned?
Most definitely, I was told that the legal ramifications needed to be dealt with, and we needed to get strong legal representative.
In particular, what did Gavin Watson tell you to do?
He told me.
What did he say should happen?
He told me that I needed to arrange fictitious loan agreements that needed to be drafted and concluded between Gillingham and the various Bosasa employees for all the monies that they'd received.
That who'd received?
Gillingham had received and the benefits.
Did you do that?
Yes, I did do that.
Where are those agreements?
Those agreements are currently with the attorneys and with the various Gillingham himself, the people.
Do you have any in your possession?
I mark here Annexure L, which is the only thing that I had in my possession relating to that, and that refers to a declaration that he made to the commission at that stage, Richmond MT, which was backdated so that it coincided with when MT was the commissioner, that basically said that he had declared some of the loans.
All right, let's take that step by step. Perhaps I preempted your evidence. In paragraph 2923(2), you say that you were also instructed to do something by Gavin Watson in relation to the outcome of the raid or the search and seizure operation.
Correct.
What was that?
I had to prepare a declaration in terms, on behalf of Gillingham, declaring that the money and the benefits he received were in fact loans to MT, and I had to backdate the declaration. MT was then to approve the declaration and hold on and given back to Gillingham, and I then took the declaration. I got Gillingham to sign it, took the declaration to MT, where I met him at the Protea Midrand, who, after he didn't want to sign it, but after I'd spoken to Watson over the phone, handed him the phone, he then agreed to sign it. And it's reflected in Annexure L.
Right, before we go to Annexure L, let's just get two things clear. You took the declaration to MT at the Protea Midrand.
That is correct.
You asked MT to sign.
That is correct.
MT initially refused.
Correct.
You phoned Mr. Gavin Watson and spoke to him.
Correct.
You then handed the phone to Mr. MT.
Correct.
Whilst Gavin Watson was still on the phone.
That's right.
And a discussion probably took place? Is that
correct?
Mr. Pretorius, do you want him to give more of that evidence himself?
I'm just summarizing, and then he can add anything.
Okay, all right.
After that discussion,
That's
what
correct.
did Mr. MT do?
Well, after that discussion, what can I say, Mr. MT, what did he do?
Yes.
No, he just left it. I mean, he just gave me the document back.
Sorry.
He backdated, he signed it.
He signed it?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought that was in my statement. I thought you'd
No, I
seen
was
it.
just taking it through
Oh,
step by
okay.
step. It might have been unclear.
No, after he had spoken to Gavin Watson on the phone, he gave the phone back to me. He had received an instruction from Gavin Watson, and he just did as he was told. He just signed and gave it back to me, and it was backdated.
Would you go to page 349 of the bundle, which is the cover page, and there is a document at page 350.
That's correct.
What is this document?
That document is, every year I was told that it was explained to me that they do a declaration of any gifts or anything that needs to be declared. This is a document that we got typed up.
Who got typed up?
Patrick Gillingham got it typed. Well, I assisted typing it. He got me the letterhead.
And this document was typed?
Correct.
It's a document signed by P.O.C. Gillingham.
That is correct.
And it reads, our personal discussion on this matter refers. It's addressed to the Commissioner.
Correct.
At that time, Mr. MT.
Correct.
And it reads, our personal discussion on this matter refers. Since the document which is designed for the disclosure of the financial status for SMS members does not make provision for the information on personal loans, I wish to bring the following to your attention as discussed. I have entered into personal arrangements with private individuals for assistance for my house and other personal assets. I wish to place on record that these individuals are not members of this department, nor are they employed by government, for your information and record purposes. And there's a signature. Do you recognize that signature?
Yes.
And it's against the date 12 April 2006.
Correct.
Is this the document that you were referring to?
That is the document.
Is it signed by anyone other than Mr. Gillingham?
Chair, it's also signed by Richmond MT.
All right, there's a handwritten note on that document.
I'm sorry. When you say it's also signed by Mr. MT, are you saying the same document or a similar document is signed by Mr. MT?
No, it was the same document,
We're getting
Chair.
there, Chair. It's the handwritten portion in the bottom right-hand corner.
Or is the signature that appears at the right-hand corner at the bottom of the document at page 350, is that Mr. MT's signature?
Just above my signature, yes, Chair.
Well, page 350 is initialed by two persons, presumably, as you said yourself, and one other.
Correct.
That would have happened when this document was commissioned.
That is correct.
By this document, I mean the affidavit and the annexures.
Correct.
But the particular memorandum that we're referring to has some handwriting in the bottom right-hand corner. Do you see that?
I
reads,
do.
And if I can read it, it reads, noted, underlined, please ensure that this, and I can't
Does not.
really read what it says thereafter, can you?
Yes.
That does not interfere. Is it interfere?
Please ensure that this does not interfere with your job or
Rather has no conflict of interest?
with the department
To the department.
or to the department.
Okay. You were at the meeting that you've just referred to. Were you present when this was signed by Mr. MT?
I was present.
And were you present when the note was made?
I was present.
Who made the note?
Mr. MT.
So at the meeting you've referred to, the document was produced. There was a discussion with Mr. Watson, and pursuant to, or after that discussion, a note was placed on the document and signed in your presence by Mr. MT.
That is correct.
You speak of Mr. Peterson, Vernie Peterson again in paragraph 2924, and the period late 2008. What happened then?
Well, during late 2008, we still couldn't speak to Vernie Peterson, so he was surreptitiously moved to the Department of Sports and Recreation. And the lady who was the Sports and Recreation as the Director General was moved and appointed as the National Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services.
Who was that person?
The person was Koliswa Sibeko.
And that's Xoliswa.
I think it's pronounced Koliswa.
Yes, Koliswa.
And Sibeko, Sibeko.
That's correct.
Now, after you say she was appointed as the National Commissioner for the Department of Correctional Services.
That is correct, Chair.
After that appointment, did you receive information regarding the fate of the control room contract held by Sondolo IT Pty Limited?
That is correct, sir.
What were you told?
We were told that the Department of Correctional Services was going to cancel the contract, and Qoriswa Sibeka was adamant that she did not want the Bosasa group involved with correctional services. So I was tasked by Mr. Gavin Watson to accompany Papa Leshabane to the Intercontinental Hotel, again at OR Tambo Airport, to meet with Mr. Zach Medise.
Right, before you go on, which contract was this? You say the control room contract. Was
Correct.
that the staffing of the control rooms?
That was the staffing of the control rooms.
Right. And you've referred to that contract before?
Yes.
Right. And then, who was Mr. Medise at the time?
Mr. Zach Medise was at that stage in charge of correctional care chair and security at the Department of Correctional Services. So he was pretty high up in the department. He had a chief deputy commissioner status.
What happened at this meeting?
Well, the meeting commenced with myself and Mr. Medise, and I was busy explaining to him the benefits of the outsourcing, and it was then that Leshabane arrived, and he gave, while we were discussing the benefits of outsourcing, he gave Mr. Medise a packet, the grey security packet, wrapped in the newspaper.
Had anything happened earlier that day to give you an indication of what this parcel was all about?
Well, earlier that day, Gavin Watson and myself had actually packed the grey plastic bags with cash to be handed over to Medise. And the bag was given to Leshabane. So very similar to what happened with Joe Gumedi previously, where he took the bag with him. In this instance, it was Papa Leshabane that took the bag with him.
And what did you actually see physically at the meeting in relation to this bag?
Sorry, could you please clarify that question?
What did you see physically that happened at the meeting in relation to the bag?
Well, the bag was handed over in a newspaper, so you can see when the bag is not fully covered and wrapped. It's not wrapped like fish and chips or something. It still sticks open. So there was a newspaper, and it was handed over in a newspaper. That's what I saw.
Did you speak to Mr. Leshabane about that particular event after the meeting?
I spoke to him afterwards, and I just wanted to confirm that he'd given the full amount to Medise.
And what was Mr. Leshabane's response?
That he had.
And what was the full amount for Mr. Modise?
Chair, I cannot remember.
You can't
I think I mentioned it in the statement. I think we get to it.
Okay.
We
all
actually
right.
do get to it.
So who were at the meeting, yourself,
It was
Mr.
myself, Papa Leshabane, and Mr. Zach Medise.
Yes. And did you say this was at the Intercontinental Hotel at OR Tambo?
Yes, but we did not have lunch.
But that's the same hotel where you had met Mr. Ngele at some stage?
That's correct. But
Yes.
this meeting specifically was in the foyer where there's a lounge area, not in a restaurant.
Yes, okay. Oh, your meeting with Mr. Ngele in the same hotel at some stage was in a restaurant?
It was
At
in
the
the
hotel?
restaurant, at the hotel. We were having lunch.
Yes, okay.
Would you go to page 352, please?
So, I'm sorry. Did Mr. Modise accept the money, the bag, the security bag, and did he go with it?
Most
Did he take it
definitely.
with him?
Most definitely. He was actually on his way either to Cape Town or to Durban, one of the two.
Okay, thank you.
You go on now in your affidavit to talk of a media release.
Correct.
Would you go to page 352 of bundle S1?
I am there.
Is this
I'm
the
sorry, Mr.
document that you're
Pretorius.
referring to?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius, I'm sorry, I may have missed this. Mr. Modise was not one of those who were getting monthly payments, was he?
Yes,
At
he
that
was.
time, he was.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
All right. It's
Yes,
a-
Mr. Pretorius.
It is what appears to be a press release or a transcript of a press release under the heading Prisons Graft. Here's the proof, Minister.
It's correct.
And the byline is that of the journalist Adrian Besson, Johannesburg, South Africa, 30 January 2009.
I recall the article very well. It is probably one of the most accurate articles.
What page is that, Mr. Pretorius?
January 30th,
The page where I would find that.
352.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
You say this article is accurate to your knowledge?
Most definitely not like some of the smut being written today.
Well, let's just stick to this article, shall we?
My apologies, Chair.
Yes.
It reads, on Sunday, the Department of Correctional Services placed expensive advertisements in 3 national newspapers urging anyone with proof of impropriety in the awarding of prisons contracts to inform South Africa's law enforcement agencies.
Correct.
Do you recall those advertisements?
I do.
And the second paragraph reads, this week we present the proof.
Correct.
It continues to read, confidential documents and correspondence leaked to the Mail and Guardian suggest a highly improper relationship between the department and controversial facilities management group Bosasa.
Correct.
It goes on to read, we can reveal that Bosasa, which has received nearly 3 billion rand in contracts from Correctional Services Minister Ngandi Balfour's department, had confidential documents leaked to it by the department's former chief financial officer and Balfour confidant Patrick Gillingham, had access to tender documents for major prison projects before they were advertised, and spied on senior correctional services officials during a 2006 workshop. Let's just review that paragraph, please, Mr. Agrizzi. The estimate of 3 billion rand contracts received by Bosasa from correctional services, is that estimate reasonably accurate?
I think, you know, if one adds up everything together, I haven't done the exercise right now, but it was an accurate article. It was actually a very good article.
And the amount?
I can't comment. I'd have to actually work it out.
Right. The first bullet refers to the receipt of confidential documents leaked to Bosasa by the department's former chief financial officer and Balfour confidant Patrick Gillingham. Leave aside the relationship between Gillingham and Balfour for the moment, please. That fact, is it correct?
In terms of the Balfour, sorry, could you refer me to the paragraph in my annex, in my statement?
All right. You're at page 352.
Yes, I'm just reading the article.
You see in the top third of the article, or the
Yes,
document, there are
Correct.
3 bullets.
yes.
Right? I'm dealing with the first bullet.
Yes,
I'm not asking you about the relationship between then Minister Balfour and Patrick Gillingham.
yes.
What I am asking you is whether it is correct to your knowledge that confidential documents and documents confidential to the Department of Correctional Services were leaked to Bosasa by Mr. Gillingham.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. And you've given evidence of exchange of documents
Yes,
already, and you may give more.
yes,
The second bullet reads, Bosasa had access to tender documents for major prison projects before they were advertised. Is that also correct?
That is correct. I would like us to go back to the second bullet, please, Chair.
First bullet. You'd like to go back to the first bullet.
Mr. Balfour, all right, at that stage, Minister Mwande Balfour actually only received probably a glass of wine from Bosasa when he visited us. He did not receive anything. I want that clarified,
Yes.
please.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
so that,
Thank
you know, there's no, I mean, he maybe had a glass of wine,
Yeah.
red wine.
The third bullet reads, spied on senior correctional services officials during a 2006 workshop. Do you know anything about that?
That is correct, it was done.
What happened? I don't recall
Well, there was
anything
an
in your
instruction-
evidence thus far.
That's,
We should try and speak one at a time, if that's possible.
my apologies, Chair.
So tell the chair about that spying operation or event.
What happened there, Chair, was that basically I was asked to do a spying exercise on them by Patrick Gillingham. And at that stage, he was so powerful, and Richmond MT was so powerful, you just followed whatever they wanted, they got. Simple as that.
So what actually happened?
Well, there was a company employed to go and take photographs and to actually mingle with them. I can't remember which company it was, and to give a report back on them.
Them meaning correctional services officials.
Correct, yes.
And the event at which this occurred was a workshop which was held in 2006.
Correct.
And did you supervise that exercise?
I just got feedback from it. I actually, if you ask me if I supervised it, yes, I would take responsibility. Then I supervised it.
Right. And to whom did the report of this exercise go?
It went to Patrick Gillingham.
The next paragraph deals with Mr. Gavin Watson. We needn't deal with that. The next paragraph deals with Lindela, and perhaps we should just read that onto the record. The group also runs the controversial Lindela repatriation camp
Yes.
for the Department of Home Affairs,
Yes.
and has large contracts with the South African Post Office, Airports Company of South Africa, and the Departments of Justice and Transport.
Correct.
You've testified to those matters. It goes on to say the Special Investigating Unit, SIU, has been probing Bosasa since 2006 and raided its offices in December. 3 weeks after the raid, the company was re-awarded the massive prisons catering contract it landed in 2004. Is that correct?
I said that this is probably the most accurate news report, but I did not say that it didn't have errors in it. The one error is that there was 3 weeks after the raid. There wasn't actually a raid. It was arranged that they come and copy the server farm. So that is not
So the
correct.
Special Investigating Unit,
Yes.
SIU, did attend at Bosasa premises and carried out certain searches there, in particular copying of servers.
Yes, it was, but it
We'll
wasn't a
get to the
raid.
detail of that in due course.
Okay.
But is it correct that 3 weeks after that event, and notwithstanding that event, Bosasa was re-awarded the catering contract that was originally, or had originally been granted in 2004?
That's correct.
It goes on to read, the department's advertisements on Sunday were a reaction to the Mail and Guardian's report last week of alleged irregularities in the awarding of the latest catering tender.
That's correct.
It goes on to say, former Prisons Commissioner Vernie Peterson suspended Gillingham in September after receiving a preliminary SIU report.
That is correct.
Peterson was later transferred to the Sports Department in what was widely seen as a reprisal for his opposition to Balfour's attempts to extend the 2004 contract. That's what the report says, but you give no evidence in regard to Minister Balfour.
I think Balfour was innocent in this. I don't think he tried to extend it. I think what happened was he walked into a meeting, if I recall correctly, he was annoyed with Bernie Peterson because Bernie Peterson had accused him of receiving a vehicle from Bosasa. And what happened was, and I'm sorry, I didn't comment on this because I didn't think you would ask, but basically he was annoyed with Bernie Peterson and he said, I'll show you who's boss. That's apparently what happened. But I can tell you now that there was no evidence ever that Balfour had received a vehicle or anything like that. And I don't think it was Balfour that pushed him out.
But in any event, it is correct to say that Bernie Peterson suspended Gillingham in September.
That part is correct.
Of which year? 2006, is it?
No, it was later. It was about 2007, I think, 2008, around there.
Right.
I can't recall.
Let's just interpose here because it's relevant and will become relevant later. After Mr. Peterson had suspended Gillingham, you say Mr. Peterson, or the article says Mr. Peterson was later transferred out of the Department of Correctional Services. What happened to Mr. Gillingham after his suspension, or after this suspension?
Well, he sat at home and...
No, but do you know whether he was re-employed or was finally dismissed?
Sorry, just explain again to me. I don't understand. He wasn't dismissed. He was put on suspension,
yes,
and he went on suspension for about a year.
Yes.
I don't know if that clarifies that.
I think he wants to know what happened after that.
Then he resigned.
Okay.
He actually resigned from the department, and he was in... Okay, that's not what
Was there an earlier occasion on which Mr. Gillingham was suspended?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, we'll deal with that evidence in due
Okay.
course. Let's get back to the text of the press release on page 352, and I'm sorry I took you out of sequence.
Yes.
Do you know what role Mr. Gillingham played in relation to the award of what is referred to here as the latest catering tender?
Well, as far as I know, he was the head of the tender committee, bid adjudication and the bid evaluation committees.
Right. And we'll get to the detail of that when we deal with the SIU report.
Yes.
And then there's a heading, 2004, a new romance. The press release under the heading, here's the proof minister, continues. It reads, in 2004, the contract for running prisons' kitchens was outsourced for the first time. The tender was officially advertised on May 21 in the government's tender bulletin. You've given evidence about
Correct.
that contract. It goes on to read, but documents show that on May 1, Bosasa employee and co-founder Danny Mansell sent Bosasa's operations coordinator, Angelo Agrizzi, papers containing more than 90% of the bid conditions and specifications.
That is correct.
So that is a communication of information relevant to the bid to yourself approximately 3 weeks before the tender was first advertised.
That is correct.
The article continues, 3 weeks later, the Department of Correctional Services made available the same document with the same spelling errors to the rest of the catering sector. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Is it correct?
It's 100% correct.
On August 6, Bosasa was awarded the entire contract worth 239 million rand a year for 3 years.
That is correct.
It goes on to read, the department extended Bosasa's contract for another year and expanded it to include more prisons, adding 82 million rand to the bill. Is that correct?
I think I do cover that in my affidavit as well. That's correct.
And that paragraph concludes, it was the further extension that led to Peterson's clash with Balfour. Do you know anything about that?
As I mentioned earlier, there was a discussion between Peterson and Balfour, and there was an altercation about the vehicle. The actual altercation was about a vehicle. which Peterson wrongly accused Balfour of.
But do you know anything about the further extension of the contract being a matter of some dispute between Peterson and Balfour?
I'm not fully aware of that, no.
It continues, that is the article continues, and we're at page 353. In July 2004, the department also gave Bosasa a 1 million rand tender for nutritional training for prisons' kitchen staff. Is that a correct fact?
That is correct because, and you will recall yesterday I alluded to it in terms of the function that I was invited to by Dr. Smith. That is correct.
The paragraph continues, again, Mansell sent Agrizzi large parts of the tender document, including bid conditions and specifications, on May 12. The tender was advertised on June 4. Are those facts correct?
That is correct.
So just to summarize again once more, you were in possession of tender documents, including bid conditions and specifications, before the advertisement of the tender.
Correct. But I just want to clarify something. I think this refers to the HK2 2004, which was the catering tender.
All right. We will get to the detail of 4 particular tenders investigated
Yes.
reasonably comprehensively, it appears, at least
Correct.
from the documents by the SIU.
Correct.
And we'll deal with that
I'm happy with that,
hopefully
Chair.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Then there is a heading on page 353 which reads 2005, you've got mail. Do you see that?
I do, Chair.
The paragraph under that head reads, the inclusion of CCTV cameras in the catering tender meant that by 2005, Bosasa had a national control center to monitor the kitchens. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Continues to read, this linked perfectly with its next contract, a 237 million rand tender for access control and CCTV in 66 prisons. It went to a newly registered company, Sondola IT, which revealed in 2006 was 40% owned by Bosasa Operations.
That is correct.
Was the interest in Sondola IT limited to 40%?
Which was owned by Bosasa.
Yes.
Yes, it was 40%. The others' shareholding was held by other companies. I can't recall all of them at the moment.
Other companies
Other
external to
entities.
Bosasa,
Other entities.
within the Bosasa Group, or external to the Bosasa Group?
I cannot recall, sorry, Chair. That was the early days, and I cannot recall.
In any event, the reference here to the CCTV contract, is this the same contract to which you have referred in your evidence earlier today?
Correct.
Just before we go on, do you know what documents Adrian Basson had in his possession to enable him to author this press release?
In terms of?
Well, where did he get his information from?
Are you talking specifically about the travel invoices? Or are you talking
No,
about
I'm talking generally about
The contents of the article.
the
the
contents. Of
contents?
the
This
article.
was common knowledge. He had done his homework. He had actually gone and looked for the information.
Yeah, I think Mr. Pretorius is asking whether you are able to assist to say this is where he must have, or he did get information from.
But he got it from inside the company.
You had nothing to do with information being given to him?
Most definitely not.
Yes. Okay. I think Mr. Pretorius was just trying to see whether there might have been somebody inside who was giving.
There were a couple of people inside, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You've given your evidence, and this is the point of the question, Mr.
Yes.
Agrizzi, you've given your evidence from your own memory and your own records.
Oh, yes.
This information, if you had nothing to do with any communication with Mr. Basson presumably came from some other source.
Spoken to him once or twice, and that is it.
But you
So
didn't
this-
give this information
No,
to
I
Basson.
wouldn't have spoken to him those years anyway.
Right. And it was given at a time when I understand that you were still loyal to Bosasa.
Unfortunately, yes.
So, well, we can submit, but perhaps I can just place on record the submission will be that this is corroborating information from another source.
Okay.
Let's get back to Sondola IT. You've said you're not sure of who the shareholders were, but you confirm it was 40% owned by Bosasa Operations in 2006.
Chair, just to give you a bit of background, shareholding changed like kids eat sweeties. Sometimes they like separating and having blue ones, and sometimes they're yellow Smarties, and sometimes orange Smarties. This was a mess. One never knew what the shareholding was. It was how Gavin got up in the morning. So I cannot recall.
Okay. I think it's a point you have made also before to say the shareholding used to change very regularly.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
The article continues to say other shareholders, and the references to Sondola IT, included former President Thabo Mbeki's political advisor, Titus Mafolo,
Correct.
and former Strategic Fuel Fund chairperson, Seth Palazzi, P-H-A-L-A-T-S-E. Do you know that as a fact?
Yes, it's a fact.
Yes. And then the article continues in the next paragraph to read, on December 17, 2004, Bosasa's IT coordinator, Johan Helmand, H-E-L-M-A-N-D, emailed Agrizzi certain tender specifications that were to appear in the official bid document published on February 4, 2005. Is that information correct?
That is correct, Chair.
So once again, before the publication of an official bid document by the Department of Correctional Services, you had in your possession, with the assistance of Mr. Johan Helmand, tender specifications.
That is correct.
Article continues, on April 29, Sondola IT was awarded the contract. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In 2005, Agrizzi and Gillingham started emailing each other prison research reports and newspaper clippings. Is that correct?
He would send me often these research papers and all that type of nonsense.
What was the purpose of that?
Sorry?
What was the purpose of that?
Perhaps he was trying to keep me informed on what was happening in the industry. I really wasn't that interested in it.
On August 29, Gillingham sent Agrizzi a copy of questions from City Press put to the department about the Bosasa contracts the leaked documents show.
That is correct.
It continues in the next paragraph. On December 9, 2005, Bosasa landed a 487 million rand prisons contract for security fencing through a small Cape Town firm, Pazulu Fencing, it had purchased.
That is correct.
Is that a reference to the evidence you've given earlier this morning?
Exactly that.
Article continues to read, there is double proof that the company had privileged information long before the tender was advertised. You've told the chair of that.
I think I explained it in detail.
3 months earlier, on September 25, Agrizzi emailed Mansell a voluminous document containing bid specifications. Quote, please verify and check. We can sit tomorrow AM, unquote, Agrizzi wrote. Did that occur?
I cannot recall that specific date, but if it's in the document, it occurred.
Right. Well, do you have any independent recollection of communications with Mansell containing, or in relation to a document containing bid specifications?
I would have responded to him if he had sent me an email, and I would have responded in that manner.
But that's all you can say about that?
I can't recall it.
Right. It continues, the article that is, to read, on October 3, Agrizzi sent a longer version headed Fence Doc Final to the chief executives of Beckart, B-E-K-A-E-R-T, Bastion, and SA Fence and Gate, Michael Rodenburg, R-O-D-E-N-B-U-R-G, and Jeff Greyling, respectively, under the subject line, quote, Fence Doc Final, ... very confidential, ... unquote. What do you recall of the report in that respect?
I recall that I would have been sent that document because I did not have time to do it, as I mentioned in my statement. I would have been sent that document by Danny Mansell or perhaps one of the team that were working on the actual document itself.
And what would you have done, or what do you recall doing with that document?
I would have literally speed read it, and I would just forward it back to the team.
And the executives mentioned here of Beckart, Bastion, and SA Fence and Gate, Michael Rodenburg and Jeff Greyling, do you know them?
Yes.
Is that the same person that you referred to earlier in your statement as Rodenburg?
That's exactly the same gentleman.
Right. And what would the purpose of, did you recall, or do you recall, sending that longer version, Fence Doc Final, to the gentleman referred to here?
Yes, you must remember that Mansell had emailed it to me, and I was the responsible party. He would want to say, he said in his email on the 25th of September, we said there that we would sit and we'd go through it. I then would have passed that document on to the relevant parties to look at it.
And were the persons mentioned in the paragraph we've just referred to the relevant parties?
Yes.
It goes on to read, that article that is, this contained the full bid conditions and specifications published by the department on October 14. That's 11 days later. Is that correct, that statement?
I can't recall that specific date.
But do you know whether you had in your possession at some stage, and you transmitted to relevant parties, a document containing the full bid conditions and specifications, which were later published by the department?
If you have a look at, the sequential flow, yes, that happened.
Right. And you've testified to these facts, albeit in different words, this morning.
Yes.
Then that paragraph continues to read, Beckert Bastion supplied cladding material and SA Fence and Gate was contract to do part of the installation. Are those facts correct?
Well, they are incomplete, I'd say, because if you look at it, we testified this morning that the cladding material was actually the fencing, the actual mesh, and SA Fence and Gate was not the only person that was subcontracted to do the fence. There was a lot of others. Yes.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yes.
You mentioned those other companies involved this morning.
Correct.
It goes on to read, this week Greyling, quote, categorically, unquote, denied seeing a copy of the bid document before it was published. He said, quote, it should be recorded that the tender was based on the standard Public Works Correctional Services specification with which we are all well acquainted from previous bids. The prior possession of the tender document by anyone would therefore be of no specific advantage to such person. Now, I'm not sure that you were privy to what Mr. Greyling might have said.
I cannot comment.
But
Chair.
There, Mr. Greyling says, doesn't matter if you've got prior possession of tender documents because it would be useless. These matters are consistent, or this information is consistent with standard Public Works Correctional Services specifications, and it's of no use to anybody. What do you say to that?
Not entirely true. The standard installation process might be exactly the same as reflected in the tender specifications of Public Works or any other department, but the actual mesh was mentioned was different. we had made the opening and closing mechanisms different. So it wasn't just a normal gate opener, it was an electromagnetic slider. So that was different, and there were some other changes made as well. So that paragraph is not entirely true.
So is it correct to say specifically the prior possession of the tender document by anyone would therefore be of no specific advantage to such person?
No, it would be definitely of an advantage.
Interestingly, in that paragraph, although the report said Mr. Greyling denied seeing a copy of the bid document before it was published, his explanation seems to indicate that, not that he hadn't seen it, but that if he had seen it, it would be of no use to anybody. But I just make that remark in passing. It's not necessary to comment. Let's continue then on page 354. The report continues to read, Colette Stoffberg of Baycart Bastion, now called Beta Fence, replied that years before this contract, Beta Fence provided technical specifications to the Department of Public Works that were used in this tender. Do you know anything about that allegation?
No, I'm not aware of the truthfulness of that.
The third paragraph reads, according to an industry insider, the big advantage lies in knowing the quantities required for the tender weeks before your competitors.
That is a fact.
Continues in the next paragraph to read, on October 10, 2005, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a 6-page document titled Equipment Specifications and Guidelines. The same section featured in a tender for a comprehensive television system comprising 6,000 TVs for communal cells published 4 days later. Is that correct?
That is correct.
On November 28, Agrizzi emailed Mansell the confidential evaluation sheet the department used to adjudicate the TV tender, which Sondola IT won on March 17, 2006. Is that fact correct?
That fact is correct.
Then the article continues on page 354 under a new heading reading 2006 Spies in the House. The first paragraph under that head reads, on February 9, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a document headed, quote, Tender Evaluation Criteria New Waterfall, unquote, containing comments on bid specifications for a contract for catering services at 7 prisons in the Waterfall Management Area, KwaZulu-Natal. Do you recall that fact?
I recall it.
Did it occur as stated?
Yes, it did.
Continues, the tender was officially advertised on May 19. 7 days earlier, Gillingham sent Agrizzi the confidential evaluation sheet for the Waterfall tender with a message, quote, Hi, attached, please find the reworked evaluation sheet for your comments. You will notice the evaluation sheet for sites visits cannot be published and will not form part of this document. Regards, Patrick, unquote. Do you recall that having occurred?
I do.
Not only does it seem that you were provided with a confidential evaluation sheet, you were even asked for your comments.
Yes, you did.
Did you provide comments?
I don't think I did, if I recall correctly. I can't recall that specifically.
The report continues. On September 15, Bosasa Operations was awarded the Waterfall catering tender worth 123 million rand over 5 years.
That is correct.
On April 24, 2006, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a letter in which an anonymous writer asks the chairperson of Parliament's Correctional Services, Dennis Bloem, to, quote, sort out, unquote, the attack on the department by, quote, international capitalists, unquote, and activists of Afrikaner companies, unquote. This week, Bloem confirmed receiving such a letter. Do you recall that having occurred?
I recall it vividly. It was always conspiracy theories created by certain individuals.
Right. So attacks on Bosasa, it appears, were characterized by what is referred to as an anonymous writer as attacks by international capitalists and activist Afrikaner companies. Do I understand that references here correctly?
Chair, if I can just add for completeness. Every time that there's an attack on Bosasa or anybody there, it gets blamed on racism, it gets blamed on international espionage, it's all these conspiracy theories. So that statement there is 110% correct.
The article continues in the next paragraph to read, on June 21, Agrizzi sent Gillingham a surveillance report of a Prisons Department security workshop at a
Correct.
Drakensberg hotel in June 2006. The 25-page report makes it clear that the agent was asked to spy on the department's Chief Deputy Commissioner of Security, Willem Damons, D-A-M-O-N-S, and his subordinate, Tony, T-O-N-I-E, Venter. The report also contains pictures of people and cars at the hotel, as well as the inside of the conference room. You spoke earlier this afternoon, Mr. Agrizzi, of the spying operation that you were involved in. Is this the same operation?
That is exactly the same operation.
And is it correct that someone was asked to spy on the department's Chief Deputy Commissioner of Security and his subordinate?
That is correct.
Those on whom Bosasa decided should be spied on, was it those that were seen as having a negative attitude towards Bosasa, or what?
Yes, anybody who was negative or problematic
Yeah.
would be spied on.
Okay.
Right. Who instigated the spying operation?
The actual instigator behind the scenes
Yes.
was Gavin Watson.
And the purpose of the spy operation?
Was to try and confirm a conspiracy theory that was, may I add for completeness, I used to have to draw up organograms that were fictitious in nature to try and show the conspiracy of the Afrikaner Broederbond from Stellenbosch. And then it wasn't the Stellenbosch crowd, it was another crowd from wherever. It was always conspiracy. So I can't confirm, that they were true because I never saw them. Does that answer your question?
Yes. In short, these were conspiracies that were created or sought to be established in order to undermine the good work that Bosasa was doing.
Of course, it was always a conspiracy to undermine, and it was from the devil.
I don't know if the two of you may have spoken at cross purposes just now,
Sure.
but the conspiracy theories that you are talking about
Yes, sir.
were intended to defend, protect the image of Bosasa. I thought it was within Bosasa that somebody came up with the theories
That's correct, Chair.
as a response to negative publicity about Bosasa.
That is
That's
correct,
right.
Chair.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but let's try and
maybe there was
clarify,
no.
Chair, because it may be relevant to other evidence that will be led before you, Chair. Bosasa continued with what you have said are its unlawful activities.
That is correct.
There were attacks on Bosasa from, amongst others, media sources.
Correct.
And Bosasa was attacked for doing what it had done.
That's correct, Chair.
In response to those attacks, Bosasa said, there is no merit to these attacks. They are merely attacks by international capitalists and activist Afrikaner companies for their own conspiratorial purposes.
That is correct, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah.
The article continues. In his message to Gillingham, Agrizzi wrote, "I didn't see the reason, need to email you the rest, nothing actually happened." Gillingham replied the next day, quote, "Hi, thanks for the report, and it seems as if they behaved well during their session, regards," unquote. Do you recall that exchange between yourself and Gillingham?
Vividly.
Is there anything to add to that that might interest the chair?
I actually said to him that I was uncomfortable doing it because nothing actually happened. There was no conspiracy theory there at all. These guys were doing their job and they were at a function.
Right, it continues, that is, the article continues. Bosasa's lawyer, Brian Biebeck, advised his client not to answer the Mail and Guardian's questions. He warned the Mail and Guardian to publish, quote, "at your peril," unquote, and said Bosasa would pursue charges of criminal defamation if defamatory material were printed. We know the material was printed because we see it here, or reference to it here in these pages. Was any criminal defamation action ever instituted resulting from this article?
Chair, we did take action against Adrian Besson at one stage, but we weren't successful at all.
Was the action you are talking about the laying of a criminal complaint with the police?
No, it was, we had taken it to the press ombudsman. I think the press ombudsman was Mr. Joe Chloe.
Yes.
And the funny thing was he had made a mistake. He must be getting on in years. And he responded, he sent a message to Fareel Haffajee and said, "How should I respond to this email?" So and by accident, he had actually sent it to my email address as well. So that was, and then we took them to court and nothing really happened.
Okay.
The final paragraph of the article reads, "The department's Manelisi Walela, M-A-N-E-L-I-S-I, Walela, W-O-L-E-L-A, responded that the Mail and Guardian's questions, quote, are part of a broader brief given to the SIU, unquote, and urged the newspaper to provide the unit with proof of impropriety. Gillingham did not respond to the Mail and Guardian's queries." And then the article continues to refer to pictures which are not referred to.
That's correct.
Chair, it's, I don't know if you're taking a break this afternoon.
It might be a good idea to take a short break.
Very good idea.
And maybe of 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Are you suggesting we take it now?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, we'll take a 10 minutes break and we'll resume at 10 to 4.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.